And so I'm like, what can I do to really impact not only Black women, but anybody who's living with HS in a way that makes them feel seen and heard and cared for.
Welcome to That's Derm Good. I'm Janelle Ball, and I'm excited to bring you thought-provoking conversations about biologics, specialty medications, treatments, and so much more. I'll be chatting with some amazing guests about access, affordability, and advocacy. You're really going to enjoy this show. This episode is sponsored by Dermavant. Welcome to That's Derm Good. Today, my guest is Jasmine Espy. Jasmine is the founder and CEO of the Association of Hidradenitis Suppurativa and Inflammatory Diseases, as well as a patient advocate and a filmmaker. Welcome, Jasmine. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, you know what? I was sitting here thinking, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a good one. Just thinking about journalism and patient advocacy in healthcare. Like, how did that come about? How did those two collide? But I'd love to kind of get a little bit of your background and hear about you, like how you came to create your foundation, AHSID. But yeah, I want to know all about this.
Yeah, I love to talk about this because I feel like I have such a unique journey to being a nonprofit founder. So I thought I was going to be a journalist, like work for like Vice Media and, be an investigative journalist and things like that, or do feature writing or something of that nature. And so I went to undergrad and grad school for journalism. And so if you're a journalist, you've been to grad school, that's a lot of debt. So I was just talking about this with my friend the other day. I was just like, it's so crazy how we both went to J school together, and yet we're in complete opposite fields of what we studied for, But the unique thing about journalism is that there's so many things that you learn in school and just out in the field that apply across industry. You need to learn how to communicate. You need to know how to write, which I was surprised by how many people say that most people don't know how to write when they communicate with them. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so, these are like the basic things. And then also being creative. I think that's also something that is like across industry, and knowing how to talk to people. So if you're personable and you can talk to people, then you can fit into corporate culture, seemingly. But I got started in journalism, and then I was looking for sort of like a way to expand what I was doing, because I felt like I hit a ceiling when I was in Detroit. So I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I went to school at Wayne State University, and I graduated from Wayne State University, and then I went to grad school at the University of Southern California. And so when I graduated, I was looking for something to take me to the next level, and I thought that might have been a job, but I came across this scholarship program with USC, and they had a film criticism scholarship at USC that was paid for partly by Sony Pictures Entertainment. And so then there was another one by Rotten Tomatoes that was like, I think it was like a full ride or something of that nature, or at least like more than what Sony was. I looked at that and I got lit up, and I was just like, oh, let me inquire about this program and see how you can get in. And I went through this whole process, one that I didn't think I would be able to get through because I don't like school, to be truthfully frank with you. Like, institutions don't work for me just because I just think they're so rigid. But, I ended up going to USC. I got the Sony Pictures Film Criticism Scholarship, and I started working for Sony. But when I went to USC, prior to that, I had published like an article about my experience living with HS for a publication I wrote for Our Detroit magazine. And that was the first taste I really got of like owning my story and really just taking ownership of my experience. And I was like, oh, this felt kind of good. I'm still nervous because I haven't talked about every aspect of my experience, but I want to do this again. And at the time, the stuff I'm doing now, the stuff that exists now didn't exist back then. And I feel old saying that, but that's true. You know what I mean?
Time flies.
Time flies. And the technology advances so much. And so does social, the way that we like interact socially. So I ended up having a conversation with the documentary teacher at USC. And when I talked to him, I was just like, I felt that light again. Just like I felt a connection and a draw. And he was just like, he was telling me about the documentary program. And then I thought about my desire to tell my story more. And I was just like, I've never seen a documentary on Black women living with HS. Like, I could be the catalyst for that. I'm a journalist. I live with this condition. Like, I'm at USC. I have the resources, or at least some, And so I was like, let me do this. Like, And so that was probably like the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. Like, I always tell people that, like, I was on the third floor of the Annenberg School of Journalism, bawling my eyes out just because I felt like I felt the energy of the stuff that I'm experiencing now. And at that time, I didn't have the confidence that I do now. So it was difficult to sit in the things that I went through as a means to help others and to help myself. And so when I pushed past that, I was able to finish the documentary and show it not only on the Sony Pictures lot, but I was able to do another screening here in Detroit, Michigan. And that was the catalyst for everything that I'm experiencing now. I got connected with people. I started getting asked to do partnerships with pharmaceutical companies and brands and all this other stuff. And I had this realization. I sat with myself for a little bit because I was like, I like to do, this advocacy work because bringing awareness to HS is like a primary goal of mine, along with telling my story. But I think that there's something more that I can do that allows me to have more longevity and impact generationally. So it's like this goes beyond me and my story because I'm only a small fraction to this whole community, And so I'm like, what can I do to really impact not only Black women, but anybody who's living with HS in a way that makes them feel like seen and heard and cared for. And so that's when AHSID came about. And we started off with a different name. We're known by My Gold Lining Inc., which sounds more like a production company, but that's what I thought I was creating at the time, was like a production company, like some type of like art center that I could channel like different HS projects through. And then through a relationship I had with a pharmaceutical company, they said, unfortunately, we can't fund individuals, but we can fund nonprofits. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should make a nonprofit, And so I have been throwing myself into this nonprofit since 2020 and really kind of established who we are as AHSID in 2023. So we've had technically a long/short time into the community. There are definitely like organizations who have been here longer than us, but we've had a lot of great traction and a lot of great support in the short time that we've been here. And I changed my pain into my purpose and really just started planting seeds for other people to see themselves through the work that we're doing and to make sure that they're not suffering like I did or like anyone else is suffering in the community. So that's how I started AHSID.
I love that. That is amazing. Nobody has really heard a lot about HS. Up until recently, I feel like the first time I saw a commercial was like probably the beginning of it. And, I've worked in derm for over 15 years and I've known about it, but I didn't realize there was just not that much awareness about it. And, I love what you have created and it's amazing to see that. But I love what you just said about turning your pain into a purpose. And that it fuels that passion. You found what you're passionate about and what you want to do to make a difference. Because there are so many people that are struggling and don't want to speak out about it. So as far as your, I guess, starting out when you were younger, growing up with HS, what age were you actually diagnosed, or when did you start experiencing those symptoms, and what was your personality like? Were you interacting with your friends? I mean, did anybody know that you were struggling with this or dealing with it? Or
I developed HS when I was 13. So I was in 6th grade. And I think this was just like shortly after I got my period. And so I didn't have a great experience because I got the condition and then it was like within the 3-year period that I didn't receive like a diagnosis and treatment, my HS progressed to stage 3. And so imagine just being, a 13-year-old girl and you are, either changing in the locker room or you're having, because I went to a private school, so we had to wear white collared shirts and skirts. So I'm bleeding all over my white collared shirt. I had a moment in middle school where my principal came to talk to our class And so I raised my hand to ask a question, and my classmate was like, Jasmine, your arm is bleeding. And so everybody turned. It was like a movie. Everybody just turned and looked at me, and I was just like, I wanted to like sink into the floor because I knew what was happening, right? And it was funny because that morning, my mom, she told me, she was like, make sure you bring an extra shirt with you to school so that, you know, you can change your top and stuff. And so I didn't do that because at that time I was in denial that I had this condition, even though it was obviously like affecting me in so many different ways. But I didn't have any friends that knew what I was dealing with. And I didn't tell anyone because it's like, I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know how to tell people I have these bumps or whatever under my arm that are leaking a liquid. And, you know, during a pivotal time, like I was bullied when I was a kid. So, you know, to provide people with more ammunition to bully me that's insane. You know, so I didn't want to do that at all. So I kept a lot of my experiences to myself. And it was funny because when I started talking more about my experiences later on in life, some of my classmates from where I went to school, they told me that they had HS and they've had it for a long time. So I was just like, okay. You know, and so I mean I was grateful to be like a community for them, but I was just like, dang, I wish I would have known so we could have just like connected when we were in school, you know, but such is life. Yeah.
So at that point, you hadn't been diagnosed until stage 3. What was that experience at the doctor's office and those visits?
Yeah, so before getting diagnosed, I got several misdiagnoses. I got diagnosed with MRSA. I got told that I was going to have I got told that I had a rare blood disorder. I was going to die. Yeah, it was a lot. And I was like, okay. And doctors, you know, depending on who you're talking to, they don't have bedside manner. So they were just like, yeah, you have a rare blood disorder and you're probably going to die in a few months. I'm just like, okay. I'm just like, what am I supposed to do with that information? Like, you know? And so I went through those misdiagnoses. And eventually when I went back to my pediatrician, he was like, you know, after doing some research, I think you might have something called hidradenitis suppurativa. And so he wanted to send me to a children's surgeon to like talk about surgery. And at that time, you know, the procedure was to remove the sweat glands, which we all know is not the proper procedure for HS. It has nothing to do with the sweat glands. But at that time, that's what they were doing. And so I went to this children's surgeon, but something about what he was saying didn't sit right with me. I was like, you're not going to take out my armpit. Like that just, I don't think so. Like, you know, but so I didn't get like, he said that, you know, I had HS, but I didn't consider it as a diagnosis because I didn't start treatment. So I didn't really officially get diagnosed until 9th grade. And that was because my mom worked for a health insurance agency and it was attached to a hospital. So she would get newsletters and she would never look at these newsletters. But on this particular day, I don't know what compelled her to look. Probably the grace of God, but she saw a clinic for HS. So they were doing, she was like, oh, that looks like kind of what, you know, the description looked like what I had and what we had heard physicians, but, you know, before then. And so after she picked me up from school, she was like, I found this thing. Would you like to, you know, go to the clinic? Would you like me to make an appointment so you can see, you know, the dermatologist? And so I was like, yeah, it doesn't hurt. I mean, I've been told I'm going to die. So I'm just like, what else? How worse can it get? Like, you know, maybe shouldn't have asked that question, but you know, that's what I thought. And so I went into the clinic and immediately he diagnosed me and I got put into a clinical trial to start, you know, courses of antibiotics and things of that nature. So that was my first experience. And since then, it's been a journey to say the least.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, at that age, it's such a sensitive age because you're in this transition period. I mean, 6th grade is kind of like that awkward stage, you know? I mean, most kids kind of lack confidence in general. And, you know, so you're worried about what other people have to say, you know, what other people are doing. You've got your different little groups or cliques, and it doesn't make it any better when you're dealing with something and maybe nobody knows what you're dealing with, but they can kind of tell that something else is going on because you kind of retract a little bit sometimes. This episode is sponsored by Dermavant. It's hard. It is so hard, and especially at that age. But those experiences, did that just fuel that desire and the excitement when you decided to finally speak about it?
Yeah, it was a gradual process, and it was a process that was difficult. the feature story was the first step. And so that took a lot of courage. I was very scared because I hadn't told anybody, like my friends didn't know, like people in my community didn't know. So I was like, am I going to get rejected? Are people going to think I'm contagious? Or like, what are people going to think about what I'm talking about? Like, am I going to have a hard dating life? Like, there were dudes that I liked that followed me. Like, I was like, I don't know if I want to tell them that I have this condition. Like, so there were so many different things that I felt. But eventually I got so depressed, and, just to offer a trigger warning for anybody who struggles with mental health and doesn't want to hear this aspect of things, but I struggled with suicidal ideation. So I got to a very low point in my life where I didn't want to be here anymore. And so I was not necessarily like actively planning like taking my life, but I definitely was on the brink of just, ending it all. And so when I went to my dermatologist, he asked like, how are you doing? And so I was like, I'm not doing well. I broke down in his office, and he was like, you know what, we're working with a therapist that is being like trained on how to treat patients with HS, and especially with depression, anxiety, all the other mental health comorbidities that come with HS. And so I ended up seeing her. And after seeing her for a while, we talked about my experiences. So she was like, maybe one day you'll get to a point where you're healed enough or you feel confident enough to tell your story, and you can help not only yourself but help other people. So she'll never take credit for this, but she was the catalyst, and my dermatologist was the catalyst for what I'm experiencing now and what I'm able to do. And so they gave me the confidence. After that seed was planted, I was just hungry to figure out ways to do that, And so I definitely think a lot of my experiences fueled my advocacy and awareness journey, and me wanting to tell like my story, because I'm like, I can't be the only one, experiencing this stuff. And if I'm not the only one, I really want to be friends with the people who are also experiencing this stuff, so we can have some type of community,
Yeah. Man, I like you're telling that story, and I'm like trying to hold back tears right now because I love that your doctor had a therapist that you could talk to. That right there is significant. As far as other relationships that you have, who else were you able to lean on during this time and kind of pull you through that depression time?
Yeah, to be truthfully honest, I didn't really have anyone. I love my parents deeply, but they didn't. I come from a Black household. They didn't really understand. I didn't understand, exactly how to process the emotions that were coming up. That wasn't something that we were able to like do. So I was alone in a lot of what I felt. And that's why I felt like a bottomless pit. It felt like a bottomless pit of my emotions. And it just got scary so many different times, because I wondered. I was like, I would lay on my bed and cry, wondering, I'm like, God, what did I do? What did I do to get this condition at this age? Like, my friends are dating and exploring and experimenting, and I'm cleaning up pus and blood off the bathroom floor, off the walls. Like, I have holes in my body. I can't go to sleep. Like, you know what I mean? I'm just like, what? Like, what kind of karma is this? Like, what is this? Like, And so I was like, and I made a deal with God. I was like, I need you to help me. Because I was like, I cannot do this. I can't do this. So I was like, it's either I get healed or I'm not gonna be here anymore. So there's a choice here. I was like, you know what I mean? I was like, so it did not get easier after that. It actually got worse. But I just felt like there was this moment where I actually had planned out like taking my life. And in that moment, like, I locked myself behind the bathroom door, and I felt like this energy that just told me to like hold on for a little bit longer. It was like begging me to hold on. And so I fell to the bathroom floor crying because I was just like, I was like, I'm going to trust it. I'm going to trust it. And I kept thinking about that moment. I kept thinking about that time. And I was just like, I don't know what's on the other side of this, but I feel something pulling me. And I just, no matter how difficult this is, I really want to get to the other end of it, and see what's on the other side, And so when I think about those moments and I think about now, I'm just like, there's so much like not only joy, but the little girl in me is just like, she's grateful. She's grateful for holding on and having hope, because it's hard with HS. When you're living with stage 3 HS, severe HS, it's difficult to hold on. There are people who are I've talked to that are bedridden, who are losing weight, who can't wipe their own butts, who can't lift their own arms. You know what I mean? So it gets to a very dark space living with this condition. And I'm just grateful and sometimes have survivor's guilt for making it on the other side.
So at any point after that, up until when you were actually able to tell your story, did you feel like, okay, I'm okay with this and I'm okay with myself and who I am?
I actually didn't start feeling that until recently. Like, I faked it till I made it for so long, because for so long I was feeling like I'm not worthy. You know what I mean? I'm not deserving of healing, because all I knew was pain. All I knew was, and I had some moments of happiness, but majority of my life chronically ill and out the hospital and out the doctor's office. You know, I was depressed. I was very, very depressed. And so I started feeling like I was getting better, like recently, like mental health wise. When I was in college, I started out going to Western Michigan University. And so I spent like 3 years there and transferred to Wayne, and got unfortunately like kicked back a year because like a whole year of my credits didn't transfer, which was a terrible experience. I was like, well, do I get my student loan money back? So I basically started almost from the beginning. But when I went to Western, I went through the elimination diet, because I just made this connection of like, if like chocolate or something like that causes, pimples on the face, I wonder what food might be doing to my body, because this condition at the time was considered acne inversa, right? And so I was just like, even though it had the name acne inversa in it, obviously it's, not the same thing. But at the time I made the connection. I started doing diet changes and I lost all this weight. I was like 350 pounds or more. I lost all this weight. I was like, I think like maybe 200 or less at this time. And I saw remission in my HS. And so a lot of the frequent abscesses that I experienced, boil-like abscesses, cysts, nodules, lumps, all those different things, they ended up regressing. And so I didn't experience so much drainage. And then even under my breast, on my back, and on my side, my HS just completely healed. In other areas it didn't, but it definitely calmed down significantly in those areas for sure. And so that helped me to gain a little bit of confidence. But what I didn't realize is that all those years of suppressing my emotions and disassociating to get through, because that's kind of what I had to do, because every day was a battle. So I had to come outside of my body in order to actually like live. And so all those years of me doing that caused all this buildup of emotion. And so when I finally was able to sit with my experience, all these emotions came flooding back. And I was just like, I know I have to tell my story in order to free myself. I know that I have to build a connection to myself to free myself. And so it took a very long time, and I'm still on that journey, but I definitely can say I'm better than I was.
Yeah, that's amazing. So with AHSID, what are you guys doing within this nonprofit to really help patients and other people that are dealing with this chronic condition?
Yeah, so our motto is be seen for who you are and not for what you have. So since researchers are still trying to find out why HS develops, there's more information, but there's not as much information as we would like. We are looked at as numbers in a system. We're looked at as patients with diseases rather than people with lives. And so we have holistic experiences. We are mothers, we're daughters, we're brothers, we're people, we're workers, we're artists, we're all these different things and not just this condition. So I wanted to create a space where people felt like they were not only getting education, not only seeing advocacy and awareness efforts, but they were seeing people who understood them at a foundational level. They have somebody who understands that you do have to live with this condition in the real world, in work. You have to navigate partnerships with this condition. So how do we help you with that? And how do you get the resources that you need in order to get through those things? So that's what AHSID is. And then we added in the inflammatory disease part of it because we really wanted to create a space where people could talk about their comorbidities, the associated comorbidities that are with HS, so that they can also get help as well. So at the core, that's what we do at AHSID. So it's a lot of advocacy and awareness efforts, like the documentary. We have a summit that we throw every year. Did it for the first time in person and virtual. in Detroit, Michigan. We're coming back with it next year, but we do things like that. We also go on the Hill for Hill Day to change, health policy legislation for not only people living with HS, but across dermatological conditions to just change our healthcare system. We create programs where we provide resources to marginalized and underserved communities. We do all these different things to really make sure that the people who are not seen in this community are seen, and those who don't have community have community.
I love that. As far as the conference that you have, when is that? And is it for patients or for like advocates, anybody in the industry? Who is it for?
So I love talking about this because this summit has been a baby of mine since the pandemic. After the documentary came out, I wanted to go on a documentary screening tour, but the world shut down because of COVID. And so I was sitting with what did I want to do? And I noticed that there was a symposium for medical students, for physicians and things of that nature, with all this high level research that, to the average patient would go over their head. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, I don't know what is a keratin? Like, I don't know what any of this stuff is. Like, there's just so many things that you don't understand in those spaces. And so I was like, okay, so what is a way that we could make patients feel like they can understand what this research means and how it affects them? And then also to get connected to physicians and specialists that are vetted that they didn't know existed. And so that's where this conference came from. And so it's for patients by patients and caregivers, honestly, too, because without our caregivers, and not all of us have them, but without our caregivers, I know some of us were definitely lost in our journeys. And so it's supposed to be a space where patients can learn, patients, caregivers, people affected by HS can learn about their condition from real world specialists, people who are at the top of their field, those who are emerging in the field, but have a lot of knowledge about HS and where we're going in the space. And then we also bring in that holistic care. So think about somatic practices like Reiki healing, sound bowl meditation, mirror work, things that really help to get through and process the traumatic experiences that we might be dealing with emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually with HS. And then also adding in that personalized element, like we have a HS patient makeover that we do every year too for the summit. Well, we started it this year, but we're going to be doing it every year, where we award 2 patients the experience of a lifetime. We fly them out to come to the conference. We give them complete head to toe makeovers. And it's supposed to help them to reconnect to their self-care routine and back to their bodies. Because I know when I had HS, I neglected myself in so many ways. I wouldn't do my hair. I wouldn't do my makeup. Sometimes I wouldn't even take a shower. And I feel like as a Black person, that's terrible to say. I'm like, don't judge me. I had a chronic illness, okay? But that's what we go through. And so I wanted to create a safe space for people to accept healing and also love from our organization. And so we throw this every year, June 6th to the 8th. And next year it's going to be June 6th to the 8th too, here in Detroit, Michigan and downtown. It's at the College of Creative Studies, CCS Taubman Center. So that is like right off Woodward. And yeah, I'm very excited about it because I know that next year it's going to be even better than it was this year.
That is so exciting. So speaking about conferences, as far as just your journalism background, you've also written for major platforms like Essence, Ebony, and Healthline. Are those all about HS awareness?
Yeah, a lot of that work was centered around HS awareness, telling my story, and then also helping other people tell theirs. I really had a passion for figuring out how can we push HS in the media, and so I was one of several individuals that was really pushing that, at that time. And so I had a lot of opportunities to talk about my experience and write them, but I also had these publications coming to me wanting to do pieces about me and my story. So I ended up being a journalist, right, and writing, and then I turned into somebody who was getting interviewed. So I was like, it's interesting to be on this other side, but I actually like this side better. I don't have to turn in an article and get picked apart. Like, this is great.
The interview part is hard.
Yes.
I'm learning that. I'm like, man, I am not a pro at this, but it's just the conversations though. I think I love talking about this, but the awareness is the biggest part. And that's what gets me so excited. You're doing so much. You're also on the board for called the Hidradenitis Suppurativa Coalition, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the HS Coalition is a coalition that was created back in 2023. And it was a group of patient advocates, physicians, dermatologists, policymakers who came together and recognized that there were specific policy issues that impacted the HS community at a state and federal level and local level. And so we banded together to create this coalition to really help shift that policy and to really build relationships and to change sort of like the way that patients are being treated and navigating the healthcare system, but also help to partner with governmental agencies like the FDA to create a standard of what HS is, because there's so many definitions floating around out there. There's so much misinformation floating out there, and it's coming from what people deem as trusted sources. So, peer-reviewed articles, physicians, dermatologists. So it's like, oh, I heard this misinformation from my dermatologist, so it must be right. It's like, no, it's not. It's not. So, our goal is to really curb those myths and to help set a standard, at a federal, local, and state level, but also to help push and change policy for our community as well, which is our overarching goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And so, man, I'm looking at all these things that you're doing, especially with your film, with the documentary, because that was premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. This is amazing.
So that was a different one. That was a different documentary that I did. Yeah. So because of the documentary from grad school, I wanted to do a global one on HS. And so I had been saying that to my friends and things like that. When people don't have vision, they're just like, I don't see how you're going to do it. And I'm just like, well, I do. So I was like, it just takes one yes and one conversation. So I would tell anybody who would listen, who I thought might have some money.
That's how you get it done.
Get it done, okay? I'm a producer, I'm a journalist. I'm gonna get what I want, okay? I essentially, one of the pharmaceutical companies I was talking to at the time, they were one of the first ones that I interacted with. And so they wanted to build a relationship because I was telling them about this doc. And I was like, hey, I really think that, it aligns with your priorities and where you're trying to go to do this global documentary on HS and look at this from a global perspective. And so the way that I wanted to do it was a little bit different than the way we did it. But the impact of this docuseries is still very potent. And so this Beacon series was a collaboration between me, Novartis, and an amazing director, producer, DP, crew team who just kind of thought about this whole idea and put it all together. But we went to London, to Paris, to Toronto, to New York, to Seattle to film different patients and their experiences. And I got a chance to interview these patients and be interviewed for it. So I was a consulting producer, I was talent, and I was the interviewer for this project. And so that was my first global documentary on HS. And we recently actually got funding to finish the documentary on Black women living with HS, because I didn't actually fully put that out yet because I wanted to at first recut it. But then I was like, okay, so much has changed in the industry and so much Black women influencers have come out in the space. So I'm like, I can't put this documentary out without talking to them, and, getting some of the new research that is emerging for HS, because back in 2018, 19, it was completely different than it is now. So I was like, it's a 180. So I need to show that. And so we got funding. And so that's being worked on right now too. But that Beacon series was definitely the highlight of my career as a filmmaker, as a journalist, as a patient advocate. Yeah, I still gush over that. And when I watch it, I still cry.
Where can we watch this? Where is it at?
Yeah, so it's on Shine a Light on HS.com, which is the website that's hosting the doc. And so you'll be able to scroll down and see the different docs within that series.
Okay. We'll have to put that link in the show notes so people can watch it. I've got to check it out for sure. I feel like there could be so many more questions that I could ask you, but I'm just so honored to have you on podcast to talk about your story and all the amazing things that you're doing. And I really hope that this reaches anyone that is dealing with HS that has concerns or just doesn't know that there's people out there that are still going through the same thing and there's support there. But thank you so much, Jasmine, for sharing your story. And
I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for providing me a platform to talk about my nonprofit and my story and to advocate for HS. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. As far as the nonprofit AHSID, what is the website for that? And we can also put that in the notes too, but just want to let everybody know where they can find information.
Yes, it's THEAHSID.org. We're currently under construction with the website. However, you can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. We're not really on Twitter, but if you want to, you can go on there too. Facebook. But it's the same as THEAHSID. So the AHSID, but we pronounce it AHSID. So yes.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Yes, great talking to you too.
This episode is sponsored by Dermavant. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me and listening to That's Derm Good. You can expect new episodes of That's Derm Good every week. The podcast is available on your favorite app, including where you're listening right now. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss a new episode. Bye.